This is an overview of Chapter 1 for economics. So in Chapter 1, we're going to discuss the foundations and models of economics. We're going to discuss the three key economic ideas, the economic problem that every society must solve, economic models, overview of macro and microeconomics, and a preview of economic terms. So in the chapter, as you read the chapter, it starts with a talk about why are some doctors leaving private practice. For many years, the typical doctor operated his or her practice alone, either alone or in a partnership with other doctors. Lately, an increasing number of doctors have given up their own practices, become salaried employees of hospitals. So we're going to ask economic questions to try to understand what's this movement all about. Why are doctors running away from owning their own businesses to be salaried employees? And what's changing inside the U.S. healthcare system that might be potentially driving this? Because in economics, there's external factors and things that are outside of our control. Throughout this book, we will look at many policy issues, including the change in the U.S. medical system that involves economics. Knowledge of economics can help you better understand and analyze many policy issues. A look inside on page 20 discusses how healthcare professionals might be delaying retirement because they are concerned about their finances. So the economics of your life. Will there be plenty of jobs available in the healthcare industry? The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that 4 of the 6 fastest growing occupations in the next 10 years will be in the medical field, but the availability of these jobs depends on the reliability of forecasts. What is the basis for the forecast and on the jobs available in healthcare, and how reliable are forecasts? In this book, we use economics to answer the questions of, number 1, how are the prices of goods and services determined? Number 2, how does pollution affect the economy, and how should government policy deal with these effects? 3, why do firms engage in international trade, and how do government policies affect international trade? And why does government control the prices of some goods and services, and what are the effects of these controls? This is a book that would be used in 2 semesters. We're only going to cover macro part of this book. Alright, so let's talk about scarcity. Scarcity is a situation in which unlimited wants exceed our limited resources available to fill those wants. Most people understand the idea of scarcity because there are things that they want that they cannot afford to buy. But this also talks about limited resources in the fact that we have oil. There's a limited amount of oil, natural resources, things like that. Economics is a study of choices that people make to attain their goals given the fact that they have scarce resources. So the only reason we have to make a decision, theoretically, is because we can't have everything that we want, right? We have unlimited wants that exceed our limited resources. And an economic model is a simplified version of reality used to analyze real-world economic situations. The 3 key economic ideas, they are people are rational, people respond to incentives, and optimal decisions are made at the margin. If you're taking notes while you're watching this video, you should definitely write these down. These are the basis for everything that we're going to talk about. I'm going to refer back to them multiple times. People are rational, people respond to incentives, and optimal decisions are made at the margin. So let's talk about a market. A market is a group of buyers and sellers of a good or service, and the institution or arrangement by which they come together or trade. Most people have heard of the stock market, like the New York Stock Exchange, and this is where buyers and sellers of stock go to trade. But we also hear, like, where do we buy food? Potentially a market. As we study how people make choices and interact in markets, we will return to these 3 important ideas. People are rational. Now, I think this is a very large assumption, by the way, because I know that people, given facts, don't necessarily always act rational. I see this in my tax and consulting business all the time. Economists assume that consumers and firms will use all of the available information as they act to achieve their goals, weighing the benefits and costs of each action, and choosing the action only if the benefits outweigh the costs, even if it's not always the quote-unquote best decision. Some of the examples I use is that we have very limited time, right? That's a limited resource. So sometimes we have to weigh the cost and benefit of doing something, like potentially doing our homework or watching these videos instead of attending a soccer game or doing something fun or watching TV or, going out for a bike ride. So people are rational assumes that you've weighed all the costs and benefits. And I don't believe that everyone always weighs that, but when we talk about economic models, we assume that people are rational. Number 2, people respond to economic incentives. The economic incentive to banks, for instance, is clearer to economists than FBI agents. It's less costly to put up with bank robberies than it is to take additional security measures. This happens all the time. I actually had a student a couple years ago tell me, I said, why aren't you doing homework? And they said, well, I've calculated my average, and I've realized that I don't need to do homework for the rest of the semester as long as I get this and this on my test grades, and therefore the homework is no longer an incentive. Now, for someone else who maybe didn't score as well on the exam, the homework can become a real incentive. People respond. A lot of times I'll offer extra credit, and I'll make the points worthwhile to require so that I can incentivize people to respond. And the final one is probably the most difficult potentially to understand, but it definitely makes sense. Most decisions in life involve doing a little more or a little less. Economists reason that the optimal decision is to continue any activity up until the point where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. This is also called MB equals MC, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. So I like to use the example of pizza. If you haven't eaten all day long and you really love pizza and you eat that first slice of pizza, you're like, wow, this is great, brings you a lot of satisfaction, and then you might be hungry still and you eat a second piece of pizza. It doesn't bring you as much satisfaction, but the benefit of eating the pizza still outweighs the cost up until a certain point where marginal benefit equals marginal cost, and then you become full, and actually eating another slice of pizza is going to make you ill. So you're going to do it up until the optimal decision point, we assume. So, does health insurance give people an incentive to become obese? Interesting question, right? So, obesity is an increasing problem in the United States. Here, in the white, is obesity rates of 1994. In white are all states with 10 to 14% of the population being obese. And this one's 15 to 19%. Fast forward to obesity rates in 2009. There are no more white states left. So every state has at least 15 to 19% of the population. And the states in red are states that have over 30% of their population being obese. So the question becomes, does health insurance incentivize you to become obese? It takes away the incentive to try to work out or reduce medical costs potentially. I'm not sure if that's really the case, but by reducing some of the cost of obesity, health insurance may give people an economic incentive to gain weight. So this is a problem from the book. The doctor makes a decision at the margin. The doctor is considering keeping her office open 9 hours per day rather than 8 hours. The office manager argues keeping the office open for an extra hour is good because the practice will make a total profit of $300,000 per year when the office is open 9 hours per day. Do you agree with the office manager's reasoning? Why or why not? What, if any, additional information would you need in order to decide whether or not to keep the office open an additional hour per day? In order to solve this problem, you want to review the chapter material. The office manager has not done a marginal analysis. We don't want to know how much they're going to make for total by keeping it open 9 hours a day. We want to know how much they're going to make from keeping it open that 1 hour. We're talking about one additional hour. It's already open 8 hours a day. And then we would need to know marginal revenue and marginal cost of keeping the office open an extra hour. The doctor would also need to take into account the non-monetary cost of spending an extra hour at work rather than spending time with her family or friends or in leisure activities. Opportunity cost, that's what this is. So, the economic problem that every society must solve. So discuss how an economy would answer these three questions. So there's three economic ideas, and then there are three questions that every society must answer. What goods and services will be produced? How will the goods and services be produced? And who will receive the goods and services? So the idea of a trade-off is that because there's scarcity, producing more of one good means producing less of another good. There's only so many people and so many things and so many hours in the day. So for example, I have been asked to do lots of things today on Saturday, but I have to make a trade-off. So since I only have so much time, I must complete this video before I can do anything else. So therefore this hour is spent doing a video instead of doing potentially something else. The opportunity cost is the highest value alternative that must be given up to engage in an activity. Trade-offs force society to make choices when answering the following fundamental questions. What goods and services will be produced? So, in a free market, or some version of a free market, because we'll talk about how we really have a mixed economy, consumers and firms and a little bit of the government should decide what goods and services will be produced. But in general, in the economy, consumers, firms, and the government face the problem of scarcity, trading off one good and service for another. Each choice made comes with an opportunity cost, which is the measured value of the next best thing given up. How will it be produced? Firms choose on how to produce goods and services they will sell, often facing off trade-offs between using more workers or using more machines. And then who will receive the goods? In the United States, who receives the goods depends largely on how income is distributed. There is a disagreement over whether the current attempts to redistribute income are sufficient or whether there should be more or less redistribution of wealth. We'll talk about this in this class. A centrally planned economy versus a market economy. A centrally planned economy is one in which the government decides how much resources will be allocated. So they decide how goods will be produced, who will produce them, at what costs are they going to sell them potentially, and the government decides in a centrally planned economy. I'll show you, there'll be a video online posted about centrally planned economies that you can watch. It's very, very interesting. A market economy is when the decisions are made solely by households and firms interacting in a market. And so, but we are now all forced to buy health insurance. So that's no longer a consumer and the firms deciding to interact. This is part of what is called a mixed economy. So some economists argue that the extent of government intervention has expanded since the Great Depression of the 1930s, which makes it no longer accurate to refer to the US, Canada, the Japanese, and Western Europe economies as pure market economies, because they're not. They're a mixed economy because some of it is government intervention requiring you to buy things. Mixed economy. A mixed economy is in which most economic decisions result from the interaction of buyers and sellers, but in which the government plays a significant role in allocation of resources. So the government, as they continue to charge taxes or decide that we need insurance or other things, this creates more and more a mixed economy. Actually, we're moving from a market economy to more closely related to a centrally planned economy as the government makes more decisions about allocating resources. So we're talking about two different terms, efficiency and equity. So there are two types of efficiency. One is productive efficiency. Productive efficiency is a situation in which the good or service is produced at the lowest possible cost. Imagine I'm producing typewriters, and I can produce it at the lowest possible cost. I would have what is called productive efficiency. But I don't have what is called allocative efficiency, a state in which the economy, in which a production is in accordance with consumer preferences. I could have the lowest possible cost typewriter, but that doesn't mean anyone actually wants a typewriter. So in allocative efficiency, it's production in accordance with consumer preferences, particularly every good or service produced up until the point where the last unit provides a marginal benefit to society equal to the marginal cost of producing it. A voluntary exchange occurs in a market when both the buyer and the seller of the product are made better off by the transaction. Now, the problem is that we are always looking for what is equitable, or the fair distribution of equity benefits, the fair distribution of economic benefits, sorry. There has to be a trade-off between efficiency and equity, because producing in accordance to consumers' preferences and at the lowest possible cost does not always produce the fair distribution of economic benefits. So to understand the role of a model in the economic analysis, there are 5 steps. I'm just going to review these. I won't test you on this part of the chapter. But to develop an economic model, economists generally follow these steps. They decide on the assumptions to use in developing the model. Then they formulate a testable hypothesis. Then they use economic data to test the hypothesis, and then revise the model if it fails to explain the economic data well, and then retain the revised model to help answer similar economic questions in the future. Economic models make behavioral assumptions about motives of the consumer and the firms. There's another whole section of studying economics, which is behavioral economics, saying that maybe these models aren't really right, because believing that everyone's rational, I'm not sure that's really right. Economic variable is something that we can have different values for, such as incomes of doctors. The process of developing a model, testing a hypothesis, and reviving a model is also referred as the scientific method, which economics applies to the study of interactions among individuals. I'm not going to cover the normative and positive analysis, but economic is a social science. Because economics studies the act of individuals, it's a social science. It is therefore similar to other social science disciplines such as psychology, political science, and sociology. As a social science, economics considers human behavior, particularly decision-making behavior, in every context, not just in the context of business. So a lot of times we debate, should school be free? Should higher education be free? The book talks about, should medical school be free? The U.S. population continues to increase, which by itself would increase the demand for medical services. In addition, the average age of the population is rising. The older people need more medical care than the younger people do. Peter Bach and the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Robert Kocher of the Brookings Institute recently proposed that medical schools should charge no tuition. Like many other policy debates, the debate over whether changes should be made in how medical school is paid for has positive and normative elements. So the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics, we are studying macro, but micro is the second part of this course, if people took the second part, which was economics 2, which is the study of households and firms and the choices they make, how they interact in markets, and how the government attempts to influence their decisions. Macroeconomics is a study of the economy as a whole, so think large scale, which includes topics of inflation, unemployment, and economic growth. So defining important economic terms. These are listed in your book. So you should know the terms of an entrepreneur, innovation, technology, a firm, business, company, goods and services, revenue, profit, household, factors of production or economic resources, what is capital, and what is human capital. So if you're not sure of what these terms mean, please go ahead and look these up in your book and gain a familiar understanding, because we'll use these words throughout the rest of the course. Will there be plenty of health care? So at the beginning of the chapter, we asked the question, what is the basis of the forecast of available jobs in healthcare, and how reliable is it? The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, publishes the most widely used occupational forecasts. Economists at the BLS base these forecasts on economic models. Forecasts can be inaccurate, however, so the BLS analyzes errors in attempting to improve them. Although likely to be more accurate over time, it would be a mistake to expect all of these forecasts to be exact. So we're not really sure how accurate that is. So this is an overview of the percentage of doctors who medical practices owned by hospitals. So in 2002, most of them were owned by doctors. Only 25% were owned by hospitals. Now it's over 50% owned by hospitals. And physicians changing jobs or retiring. So they're retiring less and they're moving over to the hospital owned. So they're not running their own business, they're just working for the hospital. And this is where we're going to stop for the overview of chapter 1.